speaker for today is Kung-Keat Teoh from Flinders University. He'll be presenting a paper entitled "A Gender Lens Perspective of the Use of Social Network in Higher Education in Malaysia and Australia." This is actually a paper for the first International Symposium on Recent Advances in Big Data and Social Computing.
Thank you. Now, after spending 2 days listening to very technical papers, I'm presenting one which is slightly less technical, more on the user perspective. Alright? This paper came about because a former colleague of mine, Dr. Bimala Balakrishnan, in Malaysia, had a chat with me, and we were wondering whether the popularity of Facebooks and so on in higher education is actually already significant, whether people actually like using it, and whether it makes a difference in the way we teach and the way students perceive teaching. So we decided to work together and come up with a paper. Alright? And as with all papers, we have more or less started work on some parts of the data. And of course, the first things we looked around was in gender. Alright? Okay, this is just a brief introduction. Alright, we know that there's a lot of social network sites these days. And we know that a lot of academics, whether in Malaysia or in Australia, have experimented with the use of social networks. We know that Facebook in particular, alright, has exponential growth in its user base. And we know that people access Facebooks quite often. For example, we have almost 63% of users accessing Facebook almost daily, 22% weekly, and 40% less often. We know that in Australia, people spend at least 18 minutes on Facebook each time they log in. So that means a lot of people spend a lot of time on Facebook, which means that in theory, it should be a very good platform to harness for teaching purposes. Alright? However, early academics some have expressed wariness. They are not really sure whether it's a good thing to be in Facebook. Some have expressed enthusiasm. They feel very keen and very excited to have their students using Facebook. But we don't really know what is the exact results, what the impact is. Okay? Now, previous studies on social networks have basically, in terms of user use, alright, basically focused on 3 areas. One is privacy and disclosure. One is social network structure and social capital. And finally, on identity, personality, and behavior. In terms of social network studies and higher education, these are the general categories of research. In terms of privacy and trust issues, there has been some work around that. Early researchers found that academics, lecturers who have high disclosures, they disclose a lot about themselves in social networks, are perceived to be more credible by students. Alright, students see them as more credible. And we have mixed results when it comes to the amount of time people spend on social networks and whether they are really engaged as an academic activity. Alright? We also have mixed results when it comes to the use of social networks and academic performance. In particular, a study done by Mazer, Murphy, and Simmons shows that the use of social networks has no implications on academic standings. In other words, even if we use social network, the research has shown that student results does not improve. Okay? Now, in terms of gender, these are the previous research which has been done. In terms of gender, we know that in Australia, the ratio is 53 to 47, male to female. In Malaysia, it's the other way around, 41 to 59. We also know that men with emotional instability, alright, tend to frequent social network sites even more than women. Alright, we know that men and women perceive the use of emails, that's very old technology, very differently. How differently? Women tend to perceive higher social presence and usefulness of emails. and they tend to use it more than male people. We know that girls in Australia finds computing dull, and I'm not sure whether it's the same in China, but that's how it is in Australia, and they try to avoid it as far as possible. We know that women prefers the use of sites, websites, or social network sites, which use a lot of writing, specifically blogs, but not men. Men don't like to read blogs. They prefer short text. All right. In some countries, we also know that women have less equity or less access to computer, so it impacts their university education. All right. So before we did the study, we had a quick look at Australia and Malaysia to compare what are the top 10 social network sites. We found that generally they are almost the same with the exception of social network sites which are different in terms of, or more focused in terms of linguistics aspects or in terms of special interest. So in our methodology, we use what is called a push-pull mooring theory. Alright, the push-pull mooring theory has been used by social migration experts to explain why people move from one country to another country. All right. So push factors refer to factors which drives people away from country A to country B. Pull factors which are factors which attracts people to move from country A to country B. And mooring factors are factors which more or less forces people to stay put in the country without moving. PPM has also been used in other areas such as e-commerce and e-learning. So these are the variables we looked at. All right, we look at convenience, social influence, academic reasons, ease of use, social networking, barriers, e-learning perceptions, and teaching and learning benefits. Convenience, social influence, academic reasons, ease of use, social networking are what we deem as pull factors. Barriers are what we deem as mooring factors. E-learning perceptions are what we deem as push factors. And finally, we introduce another factor tied to learning, teaching and learning benefits. The instruments were adopted from various other studies, previous studies. We use Likert scales from strongly disagree 1 to strongly agree 5. And we did a pilot study earlier, which produced quite reasonable reliability analysis results. In total, we have 597 respondents, of which 255 are male, 342 are female. The sampling was purposive because we needed to use classes where the lecturers actually use social network in class to teach. All right. So we have 191 male, 191 female in Malaysia. In Australia, we have 64 male, 151 female, and missing 2. In Malaysia, the majority are between 25 to 30 years old. In Australia, the majority are between 18 to 30 years old. Alright, so here's a very quick analysis of the result. So initially, before we started the research, we thought that women would be more interested in the use of social networks. When we asked around, most of our friends who are male tend to use social networks less than women. But we were very surprised to find that in the results, as you can see, male students tend to have a higher need towards the use of social network in education. In terms of learning and teaching, we found that male students have a higher response to that. This contrasts findings from Albert and Johnson, who didn't find any significant difference between men and women's perception of the benefits of e-learning. And we perceive that this is possibly due to the fact that men sees technology as an information seeking tool, while women sees technology as a communication tool. In terms of social influence, we found that male students tend to experience a higher degree of social influence than female students. Again, this contradicts results from early gender studies, which found no significant difference between how both genders are influenced. We are hesitant to conclude that this result is going to be a result which is permanent, because we found that technology often changes how people perceive or how different genders perceive technology. In terms of academic reasons for the use of social networks in class, we found that male students deem academic reasons to be a higher motivating factors than female respondents. we found no literature in perceived academic reasons for social network use in higher education. Again, we believe that this is because earlier research shows that male students use technology to seek information, while female students tend to use technology for communication purposes. In terms of ease of use, we found male students to rate the ease of use in social media for e-learning higher than female respondents. Again, this contrasts a study by BIGDATA and Morris, which reported that women are more susceptible to ease of use technology compared to men, while men are more influenced by the usefulness of technology. Alright? Again, this result may be slightly biased because it's definitely influenced by the type of social network sites the lecturers use in class. In terms of social networking, we found that male students showed that they deem social networking a more important factor in the use of social media than female respondents. Again, this contradicts results by Lin and Lu, which concluded that the number of peers on SNS is a factor for women to continue the use of the site. Okay. In conclusion, we believe that the results indicate significant differences between how men and women considered the importance of the use of social networks in higher education. We think that it implies that the motivating factors can be harnessed by academics to influence the success of social networks in classrooms. We acknowledge some limitations in our work in the sense that first of all, the ratio of male and female respondents in Australia does not closely match the reported demographic or the population of the social network users in the country. And we definitely require more data from other countries for these results to be universal. But at the moment, we are working with a few other colleagues from different countries, including Philippines and America, to have more data. For future research, we propose looking into the association between human-computer interaction and social network for different genders. We propose that if it's possible, scientists should look at the customization of social networks content in terms of gender. We also believe that cultural factors may affect the impact on gender and the use of social networks. And we believe that longitudinal studies will be required to examine if the use of social network has an impact, a long-term impact on academic performance in classrooms. That's all. Thank you.
So, are there any questions? Yes.
Have you looked at some of the studies from the Pew Internet in the US? So Pew Internet, they've done some studies on social networks. Like for example, if you use Facebook a lot, right? Does that mean you're social online? That means that you can also be social offline, right? Because some people, use Facebook a lot, but then, they're not very social in real life, right? Because it's very easy, right? Or sometimes people will say things are so, but then, they're not very, offline. They're very reserved or whatever, right? So I don't know if you look into that, but I know the Pew Internet published a lot of, sociology studies on that.
Well, that's actually one of the questions which I wanted to ask you during the
Ask me now.
Yeah, because I feel that one of the advantages of social network is that it allows people who are introverts to become, to have an opportunity to be more extrovert, to socialize in the level which they can't do in real life.
Right.
However, now my memory is not really very good. I do recall, because my earlier work is actually in augmented reality.
Oh.
Alright? And I do remember that, I think it's Microsoft, which did this research in King's University Hospital, where they used augmented reality like Second Life. And they gave patients the access to use all these things. I think the early research shows that the patients really loved it. They found that they could express themselves and socialize in a different kind of level because of the constraints to hospital-based and so on. So I do believe that this is definitely an area worth exploring.
Okay, thank you.
So, any other questions? Yes.
So just pick up.
I think they'll be good of mine.
say Facebook, Twitter, all of those you might be considering. And social networks are actually dedicated to education, such as academia.edu, ResearchGate, and how the differences might be perceived in terms of usefulness, usability, and so on.
Yes, we are actually looking into that. Matter of fact, that is actually part of the results which we haven't published yet. We are looking at this in segments. But the results are actually quite interesting in the sense that when we compare the two different countries, we found that students tend to perceive the use of social networks in education very differently. All right, between the two countries, we perceive that this could be cultural cultural differences may have an impact on this, right? But again, because this is something which we haven't really published yet, and we haven't really analyzed it in detail, so I really don't want to disclose too much now.
That will be the next paper next year.
Yeah.
We'll ask you again next year. We have a recording of it. Yeah. Thank you. So, any other questions? Well, actually, I have a question. So, I don't. So, my question is, how much of this is gender related? How much of this is a design issue? So, in other words, if somebody was working at Facebook or whatever, if they learn of this, is there something they can do to the design to appeal more, or is it something that has nothing to do with the design of it whatsoever?
Our research didn't look into this honestly, and that's why I did mention that there could be some bias in our research in the sense that a lot of the results depends on what kind of social networking is being used in the classroom. All right, but well, early research, as I've said, shows that men and women generally use social networks for different purposes. All right, men tend to use it to seek information. Women tend to use it for communication purposes. I think that one of the things which we should be looking into as scientists in social networks is to try to customize it for the different gender, different type of needs, different types of users. I think it's important. It's just like cars. All cars have all wheels, steering wheel, but you want to have different variety of cars to cater for different people. And I think that will sell better.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? If not, let